Well, hello, them there, developers and designers alike. It's week 13 still. Feeling a little trapped, isolated. Here we are again. But you know what? The good thing about that is we can focus on what we need to do, right? Anyway, let's go over what we're going to do. Today is Wednesday, and we're going to take a look at an intro to foundation yet again, part two, which means that, yeah, you're going to hit some roadblocks, especially if we're talking about the building blocks that I introduced. I want to show you another way in which to bring in some other types of components and work with those as well. Foundation, Zerb isn't the only place you can do that at. If you take a look at over here on the right hand side, project 2, we're going to continue to work and experiment with foundation components. I have an example of a scaffold so that I can help you understand the expectations of this last part of project 2 so that it's you don't have to do a lot of guesswork. Just keep in mind too, the part here that says custom HTML, really we're not talking about fully designing everything quite yet. That's kind of what we're going to be doing for project 3. So really project 2 is kind of the build up to project 3 if you think about it. I'm just wanting you to get really consistent every day, or at least during our class time. I hope you're developing and putting the time in, because that's going to be really critical with memory commitment. Okay, so let's begin, shall we? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to our project 2 PDF. You're going to find that yet again in today's folder. Okay, so there it is. Foundation overview. That's kind of what I'm talking about right now. There are two folders that you'll want to download. One, the example of the scaffold site. Okay, that's something I've done. The other one is example of site background. That's actually a student project. Okay, so don't be intimidated by this or that or the other. I'm going to show you this example here, scaffold site, kind of to set the expectations where you ought to be. This is a little ambitious, but by the end of this week and moving on. Well, at least before next Monday. Okay, so you have that Saturday, Sunday if you need to catch up, because we're going to be introduced to Project 3 next Monday. Okay, so we're just right here, week 13, Wednesday. Let's go back over to that Project 2. Where exactly are we today in terms of the steps? Okay, so we've already done step 1. We've copied that foundation folder over. We've already made a duplicate of that original folder. We renamed it. Great. Let's move on. Foundation step 2, foundation templates. We've already been introduced to building blocks and kits. Today I'm going to show you yet another way, another resource where you can find user interface components. Okay, code blocks, more or less. Pretty easy. We aren't quite here yet, media queries and breakpoints, but do get familiar with just that, reading that section. Likely going to show you that at some point. If we go back to our schedule here, I can kind of zoom ahead and show you where that's going to occur. Week 15, okay, so we're at week 13 right now. It's not for a while we get introduced to media queries, but I do tend to bring them up from time to time. It's really hard not to ignore some things when you provide a demonstration. That's just going to be a big part of how I do things. We're going to do a lot of ebb and flow. Where exactly are we in our project 2? Okay, learning maintenance. Again, we're going to practice that today. Please avoid changing the names of everything in your directory. Let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so if I'm over here and here is my directory, I certainly don't want to rename things. I don't want to rename CSS, for example, like CSS scripts. The reason is because that little folder name is most likely embedded in your code, right? Because we're learning about directory maintenance. So when you're working with pre-existing folders and files, just don't rename them. That's all I'm asking you to do. When you're creating new files, of course, you can name them to your liking. Most of the time, that's going to be your images, okay? This is the actual foundation custom that we downloaded. You'll notice that I'm going to preface that right now since we're on the topic, that the directory that I had you make a copy of for your own project Look at its structure. We have a folder called Assets. Well, the example that I'm going to show you today about scaffolding expectations, kind of a different structure there. We have all of our assets just at the root level, CSS, JavaScript. The newer directory has them bundled in an assets folder. So that's the only difference really that you're seeing. That affects the pathways and how we write that code in HTML or JS or CSS. So that's all. Okay, here we go. PDF. Where are we at, Matt? We're right here, customizing your HTML. We're going to do that yet again today. I'm going to show you some just practical ways to really get things responsive, working with that foundation framework. Okay, so that's a CSS framework. Zerb calls it the XY grid. That's the type of framework we're using. Let me show you that one more time if we bounce back over to foundation. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, you're probably learning that a lot of the terminology I'm bouncing around is very dev speak. Okay, it's a lot of things that developers have created on their own. Sometimes that language is baked into the culture, or else other times it's baked into the actual language that we're learning. So I'll do my best to be aware of that and when to point it out if it's very critical. What I'm talking about over here is the documentation for our foundation framework. If I go to general over at the left-hand side, okay, so Zerb calls this the XY grid. That's you can think of that like the flavor of the framework we're currently working with. It's they're more or most advanced at this moment in time, meaning that, okay, the XY grid. So if you hear that XY grid, we're still talking about the foundation CSS framework. They just define that as XY. Okay, so I'll probably come back to here eventually because we're going to talk about this grid container one more time. That's kind of where we left off on Monday. Okay, where do we even begin? That's a good question. Well, when we're customizing our HTML, the first thing I'm going to do is show you that scaffolding. And then step 5 right here, customizing your CSS. Okay, you might do some of that today, but I don't have really high expectations because, again, we're not having to design our homepage completely. We're having to scaffold it. What does that mean? That means getting the structure just right and then possibly doing our best to get it responsive. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. So to do that, I'm going to go over to brackets. That's our code editor, right? So we're going to zoom in a little bit to this code. And the directory that we're currently looking at here, let me zoom into that so you can see it. Okay, there it is. Example scaffold site. That's our directory. Okay, so if I open that right now, it's going to look something like this. What I've done is I've dragged over the index 6. Okay, well, normally I would call that just index.html. The 6 implies that I've gone through 6 variations of this just to get it where it is right now. So I wanted to leave that in there to show you kind of my own process to let you know that, yeah, I didn't just take one version of this file and make it beautiful and it worked. No, I went through 6 iterations of that within about a week span of time. And I'm committed to stick to it every day. You'll be fine. One folder that you're going to see here is something I created myself, and this is what I call a miscellaneous folder. And you see how I named it. I put 2 dashes in front of it. You can do that if you like. I do that just because if I'm going to transfer these folders to a server, the server doesn't know how to read that folder. It kind of safeguards it. That's just a folder for me to dump stuff into if I need to, like video or images or whatever I'm not using. I can just put into a miscellaneous folder. So that's how I name it. You'll notice everything's lowercase. We're still naming things in lowercase, no spaces, okay? So that sounds like I sound like a broken record, but that's really important too for the sake of a server, especially Unix server. Okay, so you're looking at index 6 over here in brackets, and I've also dragged over the app CSS. That's a little different in terms of the name of what we're working with, you and I. We're working with something called styles, okay? So in this demonstration, when I talk about the app CSS, just think of that as my main style sheet. That's the style sheet I'm going to be working with, okay? In this case, it's just called app.css. You'll notice that the other thing about this demonstration is that the version of Foundation is different from the version that you and I are working with right now. And that's only because this particular example was created a little while ago. This is Foundation version 6.5.3. Okay, and you can see that here in the Foundation CSS. The version you and I are working with is version 6.61. 6.6.1. Yeah. Latest and greatest. Okay, so as long as you know that, then we can begin. Here we go. Well, I'm showing you now just some expectations. So let me load the homepage here and just kind of show you, well, what's expected of me when I scaffold, okay? Well, this is it right here. You'll notice I don't have a lot of color. I'm focused on margins. That's a big one. Getting your spacing just right, getting things where they should be, getting things spaced out, whether that's padding or margin. Maybe adding some fonts, and that's okay, because I want you to kind of get in that habit. But does it need to be perfect? Oh, no. Scaffolding really is just getting the structure in place. So you can see that this example is responsive. If you watch that navigation there, it goes from desktop to tablet, okay, and then mobile, and it turns into a little, what we call a hamburger menu, but you can see that the hamburger menu itself is not finished. That's okay. I really don't care at this point. Why? Because you're still at the very end of Project 2. Project 3 is going to be where you do all of the work, okay, to get that polished and looking the way it wants to be, or you want it to be. So if I evaluate this page here, you notice that images just have placeholder images. You're more than welcome to kind of be very careful, though, I would hesitate to say, to borrow some of this code and use it in your own. That's one reason I wanted to share this demo file with you. But if we end up doing that in this demo, I'm just going to have to remember to point out, oh, wait, don't do that and do that. Because, again, we're using a framework that's version 6.5.3. So some of that code you have to know, like, okay, well, which class names work and which don't, right? Other times, some of these components I've borrowed from somewhere else. Okay. So in this example, I don't have a lot of color. I'm just focused, again, on the composition and maybe some fonts. Okay. That's really it. All right, so let's kind of go back to this XY grid I was talking about. Let me jump back over there one more time. Okay, so we're back at the foundation documentation here online, and the XY grid. Really, we went over that on Monday, and that was, well, we're talking about the classes that we're using in order to make things responsive. So those are three types of classes there, three primary types: small, medium, and large. But the grid container is really important because that's what's going to make everything kind of like fit in a row, okay? So that class right there, grid container, well, you can see it's tied to this div here. That div you can think of as like a parent container, all right? So I'm going to talk about this little bit of code here in the actual file that we have. Okay, I will get to fonts. I will get to fonts in a minute. In this example, let me just preface too. Starting on line 12, you can see we have a little comment here. It says Google Analytics. Well, don't worry about it. It's really nothing to look at. It's just a JavaScript file. It's really something you could attempt to use if you wanted to copy that. If you were to, just make sure to grab the beginning and end script element there and everything else in between. But what I'm focused on is right here. Okay, well, we're beginning developers. What the heck are we doing? What are we looking at? First of all, on line 43, let's take a look. That is, again, that is a semantic element. It's the header element. And you can see that I wrote that myself. Although I borrowed this code from somewhere else, I went ahead and took the liberty and called that parent element header. Okay, so that's great for screen readers. What you're looking at up in terms of visual outcome in the browser is that very top part of the page where it says nano and search and furniture and all that other stuff, right? It's really just the nano part, I believe, that we're looking at. Okay, and then I scroll down a little bit. I'm just going to show you kind of some insider techniques here. I did have a div that was part of that header there, but I commented it out and I didn't delete it. I just left it in there because that's something I want you to get in the habit of continuing to do, and that is when you don't know when you need something, you can just comment it out. There's no harm in it. It's okay. I really actually appreciate seeing that. It shows me that you're considering what to keep and what not, or what to take out. Okay, so if I scroll down below that, I have my main navigation. Okay, so I'm making sense of this file here. Even though I created it, I have to go back and kind of refresh and see what's what, right? So we always start with the HTML when we do that, and then you'll notice that, okay, the header is actually just the logo here in the browser and the search bar. And I know that because look, there's the search bar right there. It's a form element, okay? The way that I have that built, though, structured, is everything's in one header element. And then the logo itself, okay, you can see that. Header has a class of grid container, okay? So remember our technique. What do we do? Well, if I don't know what a class name is and what it does, I want to copy it, right? Then I'm going to go into Foundation, okay? So that's from our demo file, not from your file, but from the example scaffold. And then I'm going to go say find, okay? And let's go find where that grid container is, okay? And this is kind of something we missed out on Monday, but brackets is highlighting where that keyword is, grid container, over here on the right-hand side. That's great. That's what I wanted to see. There it is. What is it? Well, grid container is basically, this class is saying, okay, add some padding, add some margin, make it a maximum width like this. Basically, make it make whatever's inside grid container do certain things. And you can see we have a grid container fluid and a grid container full. Okay, so different types of grid containers. That class is just being reused, but you can tell like the maximum width right here, okay, is different from the maximum width up here. Okay, so the one that we're actually using is this one right here, grid container. I wanted to point that out because that's kind of a good way, a good method to get in the habit of. Basically, all we're doing is we're establishing that header as a row. That's what that grid container does. The next div there says grid X. Okay, that just says now make whatever that div is a row itself. Grid margin X, let's go find out what that is. Edit, and we're going to say copy. I'm going to do that one more time. We're going to go back to our framework. That's the foundation.css. We're going to say find. Okay, great. Let's paste that in there, and there it is. Okay, grid margin X. What is grid margin X? Well, just like the name of the class implies, it is the margin for the x-axis. Okay, so that's horizontal. Basically, this is predetermined margin spacing for a row. That's what that name means, grid margin X. Okay, so there's a big takeaway here with what you're just now learning, and that is you can see that these developers, this team, decided on a naming convention right away. And you can tell that it's very generic, and there's a reason for that. So when devs name classes, they're going to start something like that. They're going to say grid, and then they're going to get a little more specific, and they're going to call it margin, and then they're going to get really specific and call it X, or the X-axis in this case. The reason that is because when I reuse it, it's not tied in context to what I'm designing or developing for. It's just very generic. Okay, so that's why you're going to see those generic framework class names pop up like that. Grid something, grid this, grid that. You can see that right here. Grid container, grid X. Okay, that's a row. Grid margin X is the margin spacing for that row, and then the next div, of course, is the actual container for Nano, which is at the very top. And that says grid container fluid. So grid container fluid, what is that? Let's go back over to our documentation to find out. I am going fast because I know you can pause, so just bear with me here if you need to and you need to go back. That's why I'm doing that. Let's go back to our documentation here. So we have grid container, and then look down below. We have grid container fluid. Okay, and it says right there, grid container fluid. What does that do? Stretches the content of the full width of the available space. Simply add a class fluid to your grid container, and that's all you're doing in this case. Okay. So if I go back here, you can see that's kind of what's taking place. Grid container, fluid. Inside that, you can see things get nested pretty fast. We have header bar. Okay, that's something maybe I created myself because it doesn't start with grid. And then we have the actual container. Can you believe that? It's so nested. The container that holds nano, finally, after all of that. And this is kind of the big takeaway, and that is, well, okay, so this contains our H1. Our H1 is the name nano, okay? It's been styled by this class that says main logo, okay? And it's contained in this div, and that div is a cell of the grid row, okay? So the grid container or the grid X. And this is the most important takeaway, and that is this set of classes right there. So what do I mean by that? I mean, every time that you start to develop something, okay, so right now we have a header, and then we have just that little top portion of nano, and that's right here, okay? You can think of it like that. Our search is just below that. It's in its own row, just below that, okay? So these two things are stacked, and you can kind of see a relationship occurring right here. So what do I mean? There's small 12, medium 12, okay, so we know that 12 means 12 columns, and large 4, okay? But take a look at the div down below it. It says something very similar. For the mobile screen, make it 12 columns. For the tablet, make it 12, but for large, make it 8, please. All right, let's see what that looks like. So our first one is large 4. That's just for nano, but our large 8 is our search bar, right? So let's see what happens when large 4 and large 8 live together on desktop. That's what happens right there. They're side by side. So nano's taking up 4 columns. Search in this case for desktop's taking up 8. 8 plus 4 is 12. Yay. Now I get to tablet, which is medium, and watch what happens. They stack, right? Okay, so it's those classes right there that are the most important. Medium 12 and medium 12 says each of those rows are going to take up 12 columns of width. If they're going to take up 12 columns, the foundation framework knows to stack them one on top of the other. So I wanted to go back and revisit that so it's clear you know how to do that for yourself. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the navigation too much. If I do, it's going to be just touching on some things because there's a lot going on here. The navigation, let's say I decided to get my navigation from somewhere else. I think that's the big takeaway today, okay? So I have to be mindful of our time. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. If I go back to Foundation, or I'm going back to Zurb Foundation, and I want to go to building blocks. Let's go there. Okay. Click on building blocks, and there's the latest and greatest. And here is the little navigation icon. Okay, so again, building blocks are little code snippets. We call those UI components, user interface or UI components. And the thing I was talking about was, well, since we're using the latest version of Foundation, it only goes up to version 6.4. If I filter that down like we did on Monday, I only have 2 options. Am I stuck with that? And my answer is no, not at all. There's actually many resources online where you can go find code snippets, but one of the most popular places to go find those is a place here called CodePen. Okay, CodePen is basically where developers write pens or little code snippets for everyone else to borrow or else use and then improve upon. So I'm at CodePen right now. Let me show you that address up here. Okay. CodePen.io. You could type this in, https blah blah blah, CodePen.io. There you go. Let me show you how to use this. When you arrive at CodePen, everything looks like kind of like a sci-fi screen that you're using to like steer, I don't know, the Millennium Falcon. Isn't that the starship? Yeah, never mind. Anyway, here's what you do. In the search, right? Back on track. We're going to type in navigation, okay, just like this. And then I'm going to hit return. And it's going to do a search for anything related to navigation. Well, that's pretty easy. But here is where you have to kind of be a little sensitive. Well, for one, you want to find a navigation that you yourself, you think you're going to use based on the layout you designed in Photoshop. Okay. So you got to be a little picky here, especially if you're a designer. Try to find something that looks good. Okay, that's going to save you a lot of hassle. But that's not the only thing, because you could find something that looks really good, and when you get to the code, it's just the code itself is just a mess. Or the code doesn't really work very well because some of the class names that you're borrowing happen to conflict with class names built into your foundation CSS. Yeah, that's a tip that you can't really predict that. That's going to be a tough one. You just kind of have to keep that in the back of your mind, like, okay, well, I like something, but do I bring it over or not, right? Again, you're going to have to experiment. Let's try it, right? I think I'm going to conclude today on this note. At least I hope I am. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go back to where we were when we just started to search for navigation. Let me do that. I'm going to look at this one here. The reason is it looks pretty simple to me. It's clean. It provides me a few things that I want and need, and I'm going to click on it. Okay, so I just click on that pen, and you get to this screen, and you're like, oh, now what do I do? Well, down below, it's kind of like flipped versus building blocks. Building blocks will show you, let's do that one more time. Yeah. Here we go. Building blocks will show you the navigation at the very top as it should look, right? And then the code down below. But CodePen does the opposite. It shows you the code up top and the actual UI component down below. That's it. That's all you got to know. So you can kind of just test it out down below and just see how it works. Oh, okay. It's got little drop downs and it has a little brand and it has these hovers. Okay, that's cool. So what do I do? How do I begin? Well, just like you would, you have your HTML over here. You do need to just be careful if it's not a weird flavor of HTML. So in other words, if the code itself looks a little weird to you, just make sure right there it should say HTML at the top left. The drop-down option here, sometimes that'll give you other flavors of a language. In this case, I don't think we need to worry about this. It looks pretty clean to me. I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of that. Okay. There we go. I'm going to go in my browser now. I'm going to say copy. Okay, so that's a little different. And then I'm going to go back over to brackets. Okay, so we're just going to experiment with this right now. It doesn't mean it's going to work. We just have to find out, right? So I'm going to create some new space. And when I'm creating new space, I do have to be aware, okay, I'm in the body of the HTML document. You should know that by now. Don't just randomly paste something. Sometimes that's going to really affect everything else. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call it, okay, navigation. And I'm going to call it version 2 because I know I already have a navigation in there. Second thing I'm going to do, same habit that we got into on Monday. Before I paste anything, well, actually, let me do that now. Let me paste that code in there. Okay, looks good to me. The other thing, you can probably predict what I'm about to do, and that is I'm going to go copy the URL. Okay, so I know where I got that from, but if I forget next week, I'm going to go ahead and copy. Let me do that right now. Copy that URL, bring it back into your code as a comment. That way you know kind of where things are at. You don't have to guess. Yay! Okay, so if I say save now, yeah, that's all I get. Nothing's styled. There's the HTML. That's terrible. I have to go get the CSS, right? Okay, let's go back over there. All right, so CSS you have to be kind of a little more careful about because CSS has different flavors. One of which we talked about was SCSS, right? So you can sometimes just tell and see, okay, what kind of code am I looking at? This looks like CSS. Well, there it says it right there at the top, says CSS. You can hit the settings and just see, is it actually CSS? And that's going to give you a breakdown of what kind of CSS it is. Right here it says, does it have a preprocessor? We're not using one, so if it says none, that's good. CSS base, neither, normalize, or reset. Okay, so things look okay. This looks like pure CSS to me. Another way you can do that is you can use a little drop down and go, format CSS. What's that do? Well, that just cleans it up, okay? Other times you're going to see like a different, I call it a different flavor of the language. All right, so in our case, this looks good to go. I'm going to try it. I'm going to highlight all of that. Okay, about 72 lines of code, not too bad. I'm going to go over here where it says edit and copy, and then I'm going to go back over to brackets. The reason I chose this one because it has all three languages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I'm going to show you how to do that if you do find a component like this. Okay, so got to go back to our directory. Remember that golden triangle there? Have my site up at the top. I have my directory down below. Got to make sure I'm working with the right files. I am going to pretend like, hey, where do I paste my CSS? I'm going to drag over my apps, over here into brackets. And we're actually going to use that style sheet right here to paste in my styles for that nav. Now, this example you're looking at is actually pretty intuitive. This is something I did myself. When I start to accrue a lot of CSS, either I'm borrowing or I'm writing myself, I create a table of contents. And you don't need to do that right now. We're going to get back to it in Project 3, so bear with me. But that's what you're seeing right here. It's a fast way to just find things, and you can see kind of how I itemize that in the contents itself. So for me, navigation, I call it N1. If I need to search for navigation, well, I can use the find feature to do that, and I can just say go find N1. Okay, there it is. And the other thing you can do is just type in navigation, see where that pops up. If I haven't used that, let me see if I have or haven't. There it is, main nav. Oops. Let's see if I can change that. Got to be consistent with my comments, right? There we go. Go ahead and save that. So the point of this, I lost my train of thought. Well, not really. I went over here and I copied that CSS from CodePen, right? That's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm transitioning back over to brackets. Sometimes it is easy to forget what you just did. And that's natural. And after this group of navigation styles, I'm going to add my own navigation styles from that. I'm going to call it for this demonstration, I'm going to call it CodePen navigation. You can do the same thing too. You can actually put the URL back into your CSS if you want to do that too. For this sake, I'm not. Now I paste those styles in, and bam, you can see what happened to my site. Whoa! Yeah, things got cuckoo for coconuts. There's the name main nav, and right now it's styled, but it's really not looking like it should. Why is that? Well, I don't know yet. I don't know why. I think it is, however, because I need some JavaScript. Okay, it might not be the only thing that I need, but for right now, that seems to be a logical deduction. JavaScript. Where do you paste JavaScript at? That is interesting. Okay. Well, this, again, we're experimenting. We don't know if things are going to work. But if a component does have JS or JavaScript, okay, I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to show you where to put it to. And sometimes you don't even need to have JavaScript. So I'm going to go ahead and say copy that. Go back over to brackets and make sure I'm in my directory, okay? So in your directory, let's take a look. Your JS would be somewhere right here where it says app.js, or you might even need to create a new script in there. Right now, I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'm just going to show you the demo file of this. So in JS, if I drag over app.js, okay, there's something already in there. But basically, if I needed to paste JavaScript, I'm going to paste it in my own. You can think of it like your own script that overrides anything else there. Okay, so there is what I just pasted. I can say save. Okay. It doesn't look like everything is working. I happen to know why, but I know you're probably wondering, like, well, why doesn't it work? Well, this is the weird thing about CodePen. Okay, let me go back to it. I chose this for a reason. Bootstrap. I'm going to take a look at that. All right. Bootstrap is another type of CSS framework, and I think here's what's happening. This developer, and I mentioned this earlier, not everything works like it should. Why is that? Well, because take a look. Sometimes these class names that they're being used here in the HTML, they're not all included in the CSS that you copied over because you're using a framework Bootstrap. So this particular developer decided to share their component from the Bootstrap framework, if that makes sense. So if you were to have Bootstrap and you're working with that, that would work with this particular component. You're not always going to have to realize that or know that, but that's why I say experiment. That's the best way for you to find out if something works or not. If it doesn't work, what do I do? Am I stuck with this code? Not necessarily. You are, but you can do what? You can comment it out. Especially if it's JavaScript. So in this case, I'm going to just make that inactive here in my JS. Okay. I can go back to my app, my style sheet. Okay. As long as I'm organized, what's it matter? I know where things are at, right? That's the upside to having the ability to become organized. All right, you're learning that skill right now. So what I'm doing here in CSS is I'm commenting out all of those new styles that I added just for this navigation. And you can see once I do that, we're kind of back to normal, aren't we? The last thing I need to do here is when a component I bring in maybe doesn't work the way I want it to, I just have to backtrack a little bit. Okay. That might be asking for a little much, but I'm showing you very, very helpful technique for doing that. Ooh, this is an interesting one. If I go, I'm going to conclude with this, I think. Getting very close. If since we have the second navigation here I added, you notice when I started to add a comment, this happens all the time. Okay, I'm going to add the opening comment, and then I scroll down because I know I need to end it. Well, look what happened. It wants to end right here in an existing comment. Well, that's not very helpful. So that's going to happen. Sometimes you bring in code and it's styled a certain way. I could delete that comment, okay, if I wanted to, just make sure I know what I'm doing. There it wants to end at this comment. Well, I'll take it out. And it wants to end at this comment. And I'll take that out. Instead, I'm going to end the comment at the very end of that block of code. Okay, so if I say file save, all right, let's go take a look. Yeah, there it is. It's no longer there. It's hidden. So I think that's what I mean is like when you go to code and you're experimenting like that, and let's say this to you has a negative connotation to it because it's a navigation that doesn't work. Well, right now I'm just gonna kind of bypass that emotionally and just keep moving on because really there's no harm in commenting something out, and that's my whole point with this demonstration. Of course, when you get a component that does work, let's take a look at one of those. Let's take a look at this image here. Okay, I'm almost done, I promise. How do I find something? If I have a demo file that I want to borrow from, how do I find something? That's a good thing we need to talk about. Well, your strategy here could be, well, let's focus on some text that I need. Even though I want this image right here, it says 850 by 350. Maybe to find it, based on structure, the best way to do that is maybe find a keyword that's close in terms of structure to that component. So like if I do a search for saying, okay, let me try that. I'm gonna do, where's saying at, let's do it that way. Aha, there it is, section 1, what they're saying. And if I just scroll down below that, logically, there is the image that I need. Yes. The other thing you probably noticed was this is a placeholder image. The way it's coded is, let me go find that one more time. Saying, where's my saying? There it is. Okay, and here we are, right here. And then there's my image. The way it's coded is it actually the text itself. If you hover over that, you can see it's image is being pulled from this site right here called Placehold It. And Placehold It formats their images just like this. So the text you see, it says 850 by 350, actually lives inside that image. Pretty cool. You can use those placeholder images in your own scaffold if you want. I find them useful. Okay, so that's a technique I wanted to show you, is like how to navigate visually, right? That's going to save you a lot of time. Okay, some of these components I did pull directly from Zurb. Okay, and I just want to conclude with this. I went ahead and treated those components exactly like the very first top part of this page when we looked at the nano logo, Well, look at what I did. I named them article in this case, so that's semantic markup. And then I did the exact same thing. It's in a parent div, okay? Right here, that's the article. Grid container fluid, grid X, there's our row. And then all of a sudden we get down, and here is a div that contains this little area right here. Okay, and then all of a sudden you get to your placeholder image. But this is the area that I customize right here, those 3 classes. So basically when I scale that back out, that image is always based on 12 columns. Okay, so that's really important. All right, so that's it for today. That was about 40 minutes. I know it's quite a bit of a discussion. I hope you find this file useful. Feel free to borrow carefully from it. Remember, when you do, if you're borrowing a section of code like in HTML, just remember there may be some CSS with it. There may be some JavaScript, and I showed you where to find that. So if you need to rewind, by all means, let's go back over that. Actually, one more time. In this example, this demo file, all your JavaScript's here in the app.js. Okay, the custom style sheet is in the app CSS, and this is our framework in the foundation CSS. Pop quiz. What am I supposed to not do with this file? Foundation CSS? Anyone know? That's right. Don't edit it. You can copy from it, but you don't want to change anything. It's going to break the framework. So be very careful when you borrow from that. Good luck. Remember, I do have Zoom meetings. Just schedule in advance. If you need some help, let me know. And I'll see you on Friday.